I just want to see my balance, she said softly, her voice almost drowned by the noise of the busy Manhattan bank. The millionaire standing behind her laughed under his breath, checking his diamond-studded watch. He had places to be, deals to close, lives to impress. To him, this elderly woman in a faded coat was nothing more than an inconvenience. The teller smiled politely, but even she looked uncertain as the woman slid her old debit card across the counter with trembling hands, unaware that this simple request was about to change several lives forever. The woman's name was Eleanor Whitman, 72 years old, a retired school librarian from Queens. She had lived a quiet life, never married, never rich, never noticed. Her coat was worn, her shoes outdated, and her purse held little more than receipts and a small photograph. The man behind her, Richard Hale, was a self-made tech millionaire, used to private bankers and instant service. He scoffed lightly, muttering about people who didn't understand modern money, assuming her balance would barely cover a week's groceries. As the teller typed Eleanor's information into the system, Richard leaned closer, curiosity mixed with arrogance. You know, he said loudly, banks usually have minimum balances. Hope they didn't make a mistake giving you that card. Eleanor turned slowly and smiled, not offended, just tired. I don't come often, she replied. I only check once a year. Richard laughed openly now. Once a year. He checked his portfolio every hour. The teller's fingers suddenly froze above the keyboard, her eyes widening as the screen refreshed. Silence fell over the counter. The teller blinked, then looked again, convinced there was an error. Eleanor noticed the pause. Is something wrong, dear? She asked gently. The teller swallowed. No, ma'am, it's just, I need to confirm something. Richard rolled his eyes, ready to complain, until he noticed the teller discreetly angled the screen away from him. That only fueled his curiosity. He stepped closer despite himself, catching a glimpse of numbers that didn't make sense, numbers far too large for someone like her. The teller excused herself and hurried to the manager's office. Richard's laughter faded. What kind of balance are we talking about? He asked, suddenly serious. Eleanor shrugged. I don't know exactly. My brother told me to leave it alone. Richard frowned. Brother. Eleanor nodded. He worked with investments. Long time ago. The manager returned quickly, his face pale, his posture stiff with respect. Ms. Whitman, he said carefully, your current balance is $8,400,000. Richard felt the air leave his lungs. 8 million. The woman he had mocked couldn't even react at first. She gripped the counter. Oh, so it grew, she whispered. The manager nodded. It grew significantly. Your brother's trust fund was extremely well managed. Eleanor closed her eyes, memories flooding back. Her brother Thomas, a Wall Street analyst who died 30 years earlier, had begged her to trust him. She had forgotten about it, choosing instead a simple life, believing money complicated the soul. Richard stood frozen. He had spent decades chasing wealth, sacrificing relationships, sleep, and peace. This woman had carried millions unknowingly while living humbly. Why didn't you use it? He asked, his voice no longer mocking. Eleanor smiled sadly. I had enough. Books, tea, students who needed help. I didn't need more. Her words struck Richard harder than any loss in the stock market. Enough. He didn't know what that felt like. The manager asked if Eleanor wanted to move the funds to a private account. She shook her head. No, but I would like to do something today. She turned to Richard, studying him. You laughed at me earlier, she said kindly. Richard flushed with shame. I'm sorry, he admitted. I judged you. Eleanor nodded. We all do. She asked the teller for a cashier's check. For how much? The teller asked, stunned. 1 million, Eleanor said calmly. Richard's eyes widened again. What for? Eleanor looked at him. For your foundation, she said. The one you bragged about on the phone. Richard's mouth fell open. He had been talking loudly about his charity earlier. But, why me? Eleanor replied, because you need to remember why you started it. Tears burned his eyes. No boardroom deal had ever humbled him like this moment. News of the transaction spread quietly through the bank, but Eleanor slipped away before reporters arrived. She returned to her small apartment, making tea as usual, her life unchanged. Richard, however, couldn't stop thinking about her. That night, he canceled meetings and sat alone, staring at his reflection. He remembered the people he'd stepped over, laughed at, ignored. Wealth hadn't made him fulfilled. Eleanor's quiet dignity haunted him more than any failure. Weeks later, Richard requested a meeting with Eleanor, not as a millionaire, but as a student. He asked her to tell him how to live with less fear, less hunger for more. She smiled and said, "Give without expecting applause. Listen more than you speak. And never assume you know someone's story." Richard changed his foundation, focusing on education and libraries in underfunded communities, honoring Eleanor's life's work. Eleanor continued checking her balance just once a year. The numbers no longer mattered to her. What mattered was watching children read, knowing kindness had ripples money could never measure. Richard never laughed at another stranger again. Every time he passed a bank, he remembered the screen he wasn't meant to see, and the lesson that finally made him rich in the only way that mattered.